Sarah Mitchell's alarm went off at 6:30 in the morning, just like it did every single day. She reached over without opening her eyes, her hand finding the phone on the nightstand with the kind of precision that comes from doing the same thing over and over again. She silenced it and lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of her small bedroom, wondering when exactly her life had become this. 34 years old, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd woken up wanting to face the day. She dragged herself out of bed and went through the motions: shower, coffee, toast that she barely tasted. She stood in front of her closet and pulled out the same gray blazer she wore at least twice a week. It didn't matter what she wore. Nobody really looked at her anymore. Sometimes she wondered if she'd become invisible, if she could walk through the office and nobody would even notice she was there. 2 years. It had been 2 years since David left. 2 years since he'd sat across from her at their kitchen table and told her he didn't love her anymore, that he hadn't for a while, that he needed something more. She'd signed the divorce papers in a fog, moved into this tiny apartment, and somehow kept going to work every day. But somewhere along the way, she'd stopped living. She was just existing, going through the motions, waiting for something she couldn't even name. The metro station was crowded that Tuesday morning. Sarah stood on the platform with dozens of other commuters, all of them locked into their phones, their headphones, their own private worlds. She pulled out her phone, too, scrolling through social media without really seeing anything. Photos of people at parties, vacation pictures, engagement announcements. Everyone else's life seemed to be moving forward while hers had just stopped. The announcement came over the speaker that the train would arrive in 2 minutes. Sarah glanced up briefly, then back down at her phone. That's when she noticed her, a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, standing near the edge of the platform. There was something about the way she was standing that made Sarah look twice. The woman's hands were shaking as she clutched a worn purse against her chest. Tears were streaming down her face, but she wasn't making a sound. She just stood there, staring at the tracks, her whole body trembling. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror more times than she wanted to admit. It was the look of someone who had run out of reasons to keep going. The rumble of the approaching train echoed through the tunnel. Sarah watched as the young woman took a small step closer to the edge. Then another. Her toes were right at the yellow warning line now. Sarah's heart started pounding. Around her, nobody else seemed to notice. They were all in their own worlds, waiting for the train, checking the time, adjusting their bags. The young woman shifted her weight forward slightly, and Sarah saw her shoulders rise and fall with what looked like a deep breath. No, Sarah didn't think. She just moved. She dropped her phone and pushed through the people between them, her hand reaching out. The train burst into the station just as she grabbed the young woman's arm and pulled hard, wrapping her other arm around her waist. They both stumbled backward, falling onto the concrete platform as the train rushed past them with a deafening roar. Sarah's knee hit the ground hard, sending a sharp pain up her leg, but she didn't let go. The young woman was sobbing now, these raw, broken sounds that came from somewhere deep inside. Sarah held on to her, both of them sitting there on the dirty platform while commuters stepped around them to board the train. "I've got you," Sarah heard herself saying over and over. "I've got you. You're okay. I've got you." The young woman turned into her, burying her face in Sarah's shoulder, and cried like the world was ending. And maybe for her it had been about to. Sarah felt her own eyes filling with tears as she held this stranger. This girl she'd never seen before but somehow understood completely. Station security arrived, helping them to their feet and taking them to a small office away from the platform. The young woman's name was Elena Rodriguez. She was 23 years old, and as they sat there with cups of water that neither of them drank, her story came tumbling out between sobs. She'd lost her job 3 weeks ago. She'd been working at a retail store, barely making enough to cover her rent, and they'd let her go without warning. Her landlord had served her an eviction notice. She had $200 to her name and nowhere to go. Her family was back in another state, and she was too ashamed to call them and tell them she'd failed. This morning, she'd woken up in her apartment and couldn't see any way forward. She couldn't see any point in trying anymore. "I just wanted it to stop," Elena whispered, staring at her hands. "I just wanted everything to stop hurting." Sarah felt like she was looking into a mirror, but one that showed her someone younger, someone who hadn't yet spent 2 years just going through the motions. Elena was at the edge of giving up, but Sarah realized, had already given up. She'd just been too scared to admit it. I know, Sarah said quietly. I know exactly what you mean. Elena looked up at her, her eyes red and swollen. You do? Sarah nodded. She surprised herself by telling the truth. I wake up every morning and I can't remember why I'm supposed to care. About anything. My life, my job, any of it. I've been going through the motions for 2 years. And I don't know why I'm still doing it. They sat there in that small security office. 2 strangers sharing the kind of truth that people usually keep locked away. Sarah told Elena about her divorce, about how she felt like she'd failed at the one thing that was supposed to give her life meaning. Elena told Sarah about the dreams she'd had when she moved to the city, about how she'd thought everything would be different, better, and how reality had crushed those dreams one disappointment at a time. The security guard came back eventually, asking if they needed him to call anyone. Sarah looked at Elena and made a decision she hadn't even known she was capable of making anymore. Come on, she said, standing up and holding out her hand to Elena. Let's get out of here. They took a different train line to a small cafe Sarah sometimes passed on her way home but had never gone into. It was the kind of place with mismatched furniture and plants hanging in the windows, and it was almost empty at this time of morning. They sat at a table in the back corner, and Sarah ordered them both coffee and muffins, even though neither of them felt like eating. I don't even know your name, Elena said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Sarah Mitchell. Thank you, Sarah, Elena's voice broke, for seeing me. Those words hit Sarah harder than she expected. For seeing me. When was the last time anyone had really seen her? When was the last time she'd let anyone see her? They talked for over an hour. Sarah found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years, maybe ever. She told Elena about how empty her apartment felt, how she'd stopped calling her friends because she didn't want to burden them with her sadness, how she'd convinced herself that this was just what life was now. Elena listened like every word mattered, like Sarah's pain was just as real and valid as her own. And Sarah listened to Elena talk about her fears, about feeling like she'd let everyone down, about being so tired of fighting and struggling and never getting anywhere. As Sarah listened, she realized something that made her chest ache. This young woman had her whole life ahead of her. She deserved to have hope. She deserved to believe things could get better. And if Sarah believed that for Elena, why couldn't she believe it for herself? Sarah pulled out her phone, surprised to see it was somehow still in one piece after she'd dropped it on the platform. Her hands were steadier than they'd been in months as she started searching for resources. Crisis hotlines, job assistance programs, community centers that offered free counseling. She wrote down numbers and addresses on napkins, her pen moving with a purpose she hadn't felt in so long. Elena watched her with something like wonder in her eyes. Why are you doing all this for me? You don't even know me. Sarah looked up from her phone, and for the first time in 2 years she felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking but opening, like a window that had been sealed shut finally letting in air. Because I needed to, Sarah said simply. Because maybe I needed to remember that I could. They spent the rest of the morning making phone calls. Sarah talked to a crisis counselor on the phone first, explaining the situation, then handed the phone to Elena. While Elena spoke quietly with the counselor, Sarah researched temporary housing programs and found one that had openings. She called them, explained Elena's situation, and felt a surge of something unfamiliar when they said they could offer her a bed that night. When Elena hung up from the crisis line, there was something different in her face. She looked exhausted, wrung out, but also like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't carrying all of it alone anymore. They want me to come in today, Elena said, for an intake appointment. They said they can help me find a therapist. That's good, Sarah said. That's really good. I don't have insurance, though. I can't afford that. There are sliding scale options, Sarah interrupted gently. Programs based on income. We'll figure it out. We. Sarah had said we. When had she last felt like part of a we with anyone? She went with Elena to the housing program first. It was in a church basement, clean but basic, with rows of beds separated by curtains. The woman who ran it, Mrs. Chen, was in her 60s with kind eyes and efficient movements. She took Elena's information, showed her where she'd be sleeping, and explained the rules. No drugs, no alcohol, 10 p.m. curfew, and everyone was expected to spend their days looking for work or attending the free job training programs they offered. You'll be okay here, Mrs. Chen said to Elena, and you're not alone. Half the people here were right where you were not long ago. Some of them are working now, saving up for their own places. You can do this too. Sarah watched Elena's eyes fill with tears again, but these were different tears. These weren't the desperate, drowning tears from the platform. These were the tears of someone who'd been holding their breath for so long and was finally able to breathe. After Elena was settled, Sarah insisted on taking her to the intake appointment at the community mental health center. They sat in the waiting room together, and Sarah found herself telling Elena more about her own life. About how she used to love photography before she got too busy with work and married life. About how she'd wanted to travel but kept putting it off. About all the small ways she'd let herself disappear. You should do those things, Elena said. You should travel. Take pictures again. Sarah smiled sadly. Maybe. No, really, Elena pressed. Sarah, you saved my life today. Literally saved my life. But you can't save mine and let yours just stay like this. That doesn't make sense. The words hit Sarah like a physical thing. This young woman who hours ago had been ready to end everything was sitting here telling her she needed to live. Really live. Not just exist. I don't know how to start, Sarah admitted. Maybe the same way I am, Elena said. One small thing at a time. They exchanged phone numbers before Sarah left that day. Elena hugged her tight, whispering thank you one more time, and Sarah hugged her back, feeling something shift inside her chest. It wasn't happiness exactly. She didn't know if she remembered what happiness felt like, but it was something. It was the feeling of mattering, of making a difference, of being seen and needed and real. Sarah went to work late that day, something she never did. Her boss, Karen, gave her a disapproving look when she came in, but Sarah found she didn't care as much as she usually would have. She sat at her desk and tried to focus on the spreadsheets and data analysis that filled her days, but her mind kept drifting back to Elena, to the platform, to those moments when everything had hung in the balance. She'd saved someone's life today. When had the last time been that she'd done anything that actually mattered? That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what Elena had said. About not letting her own life stay like this. She looked around her living room, really looked at it, and saw how empty it was. Bare walls. No personal touches. She'd moved in 2 years ago and had never bothered to make it feel like home. Because home was supposed to be with David, and when that fell apart, she'd just given up on the idea entirely. She opened the closet and found the old box she'd shoved in the back. Her camera equipment. Her photography books. She pulled them out, dust coating her hands, and sat on the floor surrounded by pieces of the person she used to be. There were memory cards full of photos she'd taken years ago. Sunsets, street scenes, random moments of beauty she'd captured because they'd moved something in her. Sarah plugged one of the cards into her laptop and spent the next hour looking through old photos. There she was, younger, smiling at the camera that David must have been holding. There were their friends, trips they'd taken, dinners they'd hosted. She'd been alive then. She'd had hobbies and interests and people she cared about. When had she let all of that go? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hi Sarah, it's Elena. Just wanted to let you know I'm okay. Settling into the shelter. Had my first therapy appointment. It was hard but good. Thank you again for today. For everything. I hope you're okay too. Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing back. I'm glad you're okay. Keep me updated on how you're doing. And Elena? Thank you too. More than you know. She meant it. Elena had given her something today. Something she hadn't even known she'd lost. A reason, a purpose. A reminder that her actions mattered. That she could make a difference. That she existed in a way that was real and significant. Sarah lay in bed that night, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She still felt lost, still felt broken in ways she didn't know how to fix, but there was something else there too now. A tiny spark of something that might eventually become hope. Sarah started checking in with Elena every few days. Text messages at first, just quick exchanges about how job applications were going or how therapy was helping. But those texts became phone calls, and those phone calls sometimes lasted an hour or more. They talked about everything and nothing. Elena told her about growing up in a small town, about her mom who worked 2 jobs to support her and her younger brother, about dreams of becoming a teacher someday. Sarah talked about her work, about her marriage and divorce, about the person she used to be. I think I forgot who I was, Sarah admitted one evening, sitting on her couch with her phone pressed to her ear. I spent so many years being David's wife, and then when that ended, there was just nothing. I didn't know who I was without that identity. So figure it out now, Elena said. There was something lighter in her voice these days. Still struggling, still fighting, but no longer drowning. Who do you want to be? It was such a simple question, but it made Sarah's chest tighten. Who did she want to be? She had no idea. She'd stopped thinking about that years ago. I don't know, Sarah said honestly. Then maybe start trying things, Elena suggested.
Didn't you say you used to love photography?
Start there. After they hung up, Sarah pulled out her camera again. She charged the battery, cleaned the lens, and just held it in her hands for a while. The weight of it felt foreign and familiar at the same time. She remembered how it used to feel like an extension of herself, how she'd see the world through frames and light and composition. When had she stopped seeing beauty in things? The next Saturday, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She woke up early, grabbed her camera, and went for a walk with no destination in mind. She ended up at a park she'd passed 100 times but never actually entered. The morning light was soft and golden, filtering through the trees. A couple was walking their dog. Kids were playing on the swings, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Sarah raised her camera and started shooting. It felt awkward at first, like relearning a language she used to speak fluently. But slowly, frame by frame, something in her began to remember. The way light could tell a story. The way a moment could be captured and held. The way the world was full of small, beautiful things if you only paid attention. She spent 3 hours in that park, taking photos of everything. Flowers, shadows, an elderly man feeding pigeons, a little girl blowing bubbles. When she finally went home, her feet hurt and her camera was full of images. And she realized she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Contentment. Maybe even a small piece of joy. At work the following Monday, Sarah's coworker Tom stopped by her desk. They'd worked together for 5 years, but Sarah had kept him at a distance for the past 2. She'd kept everyone at a distance. Hey, Tom said, looking a little uncertain. A few of us are getting drinks after work on Friday. Do you want to come? Sarah's first instinct was to say no, to make up an excuse like she always did. But she thought about Elena, about how she was pushing herself to try to keep going, to not give up. If Elena could do that after everything she'd been through, couldn't Sarah at least try to reconnect with the world? Yeah, Sarah said and saw Tom's eyebrows rise in surprise. I'd like that. Friday came and Sarah almost backed out 3 times. But she made herself go, made herself walk into the bar where her coworkers were gathering. There was Tom and Maria from accounting and James, who was always making terrible jokes. They greeted her warmly, and if they were surprised she'd actually shown up, they didn't say so. The conversation was light and easy. They talked about work drama, about a terrible movie James had seen about Maria's upcoming wedding. Sarah mostly listened at first, but slowly, she found herself joining in, laughing at James's jokes, asking Maria about her wedding plans, and when Tom asked her how she'd been doing, really doing, she surprised herself by telling him a version of the truth. I've been in a tough place for a while, she said, but I think I'm starting to find my way out. Tom nodded, his expression understanding. Divorce is rough. For what it's worth, we've missed having you around. The real you, I mean. The real her. Sarah wasn't even sure what that meant anymore, but she was starting to want to find out. She told them about her photography, about how she'd started taking pictures again. Maria got excited and asked to see some, and Sarah found herself pulling out her phone, showing them the shots from the park. They loved them. James said she should display them somewhere. Maria said she should start an Instagram account. I don't know, Sarah said, but she was smiling. Maybe. When she got home that night, she did start an Instagram account. She uploaded a few of her favorite photos from the park and wrote a simple caption, "Relearning how to see the world." She got a comment within minutes. It was from Elena. These are beautiful. You're so talented. Keep going. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were the tears that come when you realize you're not alone, that someone sees you and believes in you, that maybe you're worth believing in yourself. The weeks turned into a month. Then 2. Elena got a job at a coffee shop. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She was saving money, still living at the shelter but working toward getting her own place. She was going to therapy twice a week and had started taking classes at the community college. She sent Sarah updates constantly, filled with excitement and hope and determination. And Sarah found that she was changing too. Slowly, but surely. She went out with her coworkers more often. She took her camera everywhere, building a collection of images that told the story of a city she'd stopped noticing. She called her sister, who she'd been avoiding for months, and they had a long, tearful conversation about everything Sarah had been going through. Her sister invited her to visit, to meet her new niece who Sarah hadn't even known existed because she'd been so wrapped up in her own pain. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "I'm sorry I disappeared." "You're here now," her sister replied. "That's what matters." One evening, Sarah sat in her apartment looking through the photos on her camera. She had hundreds now. Thousands. Each one a small piece of the world she'd captured. A moment of beauty or meaning or simple existence. She thought about Elena, about how saving her life had somehow started saving Sarah's own. She thought about how sometimes the things we do for others end up being exactly what we need for ourselves. Her phone rang. It was Elena, and she was crying, but they were happy tears this time. "I got it," Elena said through her sobs. "I got approved for an apartment. It's tiny and it's not in the best neighborhood, but it's mine. I'm moving in next week. Elena, that's amazing." Sarah's own eyes filled with tears. "I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you," Elena said. "You saved my life, Sarah, you really did. And not just that day on the platform. Every day since then. Every text, every phone call, every time you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." After they hung up, Sarah sat there in the quiet of her apartment and let herself feel everything. The pride in Elena's accomplishment, the joy of having been part of someone's healing, but also something deeper, something that had been growing in her chest for months now. Purpose, meaning, the sense that her life mattered, that her actions had weight and consequence, that she existed in a way that was real and significant. She thought about the woman she'd been that morning on the metro platform, going through the motions, barely alive. And she thought about who she was becoming now. Someone who cared, someone who tried, someone who hadn't given up, even though she'd wanted to so many times. Sarah opened her laptop and started typing. She wasn't sure what she was writing at first, but the words poured out. About depression and loss and finding yourself when you thought there was nothing left to find. About how sometimes saving someone else's life shows you how to save your own. About hope and healing and the long, difficult journey back to wanting to be alive. When she finished, it was after midnight and she had pages and pages of words. Her story. Elena's story. Their story. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Mitchell felt like she had something to say. Sarah's writing sat in her laptop for a week before she worked up the courage to do anything with it. She read it over and over, editing and changing and questioning whether anyone would care about what she had to say. But every time she thought about deleting it, she remembered Elena's words. "You saved my life." If her story, their story, could help even one person feel less alone, wasn't it worth sharing? She started a blog. Nothing fancy, just a simple platform where she could post her words. She titled it The Platform, as a private acknowledgement of where it all began. Her first post was the story of that day on the metro, written raw and honest, holding nothing back about her own pain and Elena's desperation, and the moment that changed both their lives. She published it late on a Sunday night, then closed her laptop quickly, afraid to see if anyone would even read it. By Monday morning, she had 50 comments. By Tuesday, over 100. People sharing their own stories of depression and darkness and the moments that pulled them back. People thanking her for being honest. People saying they needed to hear this, that they felt seen, that they weren't alone anymore. Sarah sat at her desk at work, tears streaming down her face as she read comment after comment. She thought she'd been writing for herself, maybe for Elena, but it turned out she'd been writing for all these people too. For everyone who'd ever felt invisible and worthless and like the world would be better off without them. She wrote more, about her divorce and the grief of losing the future she'd planned, about learning to take photos again and finding beauty in small moments, about rebuilding friendships and calling her sister, and the slow, difficult work of putting yourself back together piece by piece. Her blog grew. Hundreds of followers became thousands. People sent her messages, long and heartfelt, sharing their own struggles and thanking her for creating a space where pain didn't have to be hidden. One message in particular stuck with her. It was from a man named Marcus who said he'd been planning to end his life when he stumbled across her blog. He'd read every post in one sitting, and something in her words had made him call a crisis hotline instead. He was in treatment now. He was trying. "You saved my life without even knowing it," he wrote. "Just by being honest about your own struggles. Thank you." Sarah showed the message to Elena during one of their regular coffee meetups. They'd gotten into the habit of meeting every Saturday morning at the cafe where Elena worked. Elena would make them fancy lattes using her employee discount, and they'd sit and talk for hours. "This is incredible," Elena said, reading Marcus's message. "Sarah, you're helping so many people." "I don't know about that," Sarah said, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't quite true. She was helping people. She could see it in the comments, in the messages, in the stories people shared with her, but more than that, helping them was helping her. Every time she wrote about pain and healing, she processed more of her own. Every time someone thanked her, she felt more real, more solid, more like a person who mattered. "You should do more," Elena said suddenly, like not just the blog. "What if you started some kind of support group or something?" The idea planted itself in Sarah's mind and wouldn't let go. A support group, a place where people could come together and share their stories and support each other through the darkness. She'd been to therapy, but there was something different about connecting with people who'd been through similar struggles, something powerful about not being alone. She started researching, found a community center that offered free space for support groups, reached out to local therapists about resources and best practices, put together information packets about crisis hotlines and mental health services, and then nervously, she posted on her blog about starting a weekly support group for people struggling with depression, suicidal thoughts, and the aftermath of trauma. "I'm not a therapist," she wrote. "I'm just someone who's been there, who's still there some days. But I've learned that we don't have to go through this alone. And I want to create a space where we can be honest and real and support each other through the hard days." She expected maybe 5 or 10 people to show up to the first meeting. 23 came. They sat in a circle in a small room at the community center, and Sarah's hands were shaking as she introduced herself. She told them about the platform, about Elena, about her own struggles with depression and feeling worthless. And then, one by one, other people started sharing too. There was James, a veteran dealing with PTSD. There was Keisha, who'd lost her husband to suicide and was drowning in guilt. There was young Michael, barely 18, who'd been kicked out by his parents and was living in his car. There was Maria, in her 60s, whose depression had stolen decades of her life, and who was finally trying to fight back. Each story was different, but the thread that connected them all was the same: pain, darkness, the struggle to keep going when everything felt impossible. And underneath it all, the quiet, desperate hope that things could get better. The meetings became the highlight of Sarah's week. She'd spend her lunch breaks planning topics and gathering resources. She'd print out lists of free therapists and food banks and job training programs. She'd bring homemade cookies and coffee and create a space that felt warm and safe and judgment-free. Elena started coming to help, even though she didn't share her story with the group. She'd set up chairs and greet people as they arrived and make sure everyone had something to drink. Sometimes Sarah would catch her eye across the room and they'd share a smile, a private acknowledgement of how far they'd both come. 3 months in, Sarah arrived early to set up and found James waiting outside. "Hey," she said, unlocking the door. "You're early today." "Yeah." James shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to talk to you before the others got here." They sat down in the empty room and James stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I've been coming to these meetings for 3 months now," he said, "and I need you to know that they've saved my life. Maybe not as dramatically as you saved Elena's, but just as real. I was drowning, Sarah. The PTSD, the nightmares, the way I couldn't connect with anyone anymore. I'd pretty much decided there was no point in trying." His voice cracked. "But coming here every week, hearing other people's stories, knowing I'm not alone in this, it's given me a reason to keep fighting. And I wanted to say thank you for creating this space, for being brave enough to share your story so the rest of us could share ours." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. "You don't have to thank me. We're all doing this together." "No," James said firmly. "You started it. You made it possible. That matters." As the room filled with people that night, Sarah looked around at the faces that had become familiar. These weren't strangers anymore. They were a community, a family of sorts bound together by shared pain and the determination to survive it. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, invisible and empty and barely holding on. That woman would never have believed she could create something like this, that her pain could become purpose, that saving one person could lead to helping dozens. After the meeting ended and everyone had left, Elena helped Sarah clean up. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Elena said, stacking chairs. "That day on the platform. I was so sure my life was over, so convinced that I had nothing to offer and no reason to keep going." She paused, turning to look at Sarah. "But look at us now. Look at what we've built. Look at all these people who are here because we survived. Because you saved me, and in doing that you saved yourself, and now we're helping save others." Sarah thought about that word. Saved. It was dramatic, maybe even melodramatic. But it was also true. She had saved Elena, and Elena, in a way, had saved her right back. And now they were creating spaces where other people could save each other. "I've been thinking about doing more," Sarah said slowly. She'd been turning an idea over in her mind for weeks but hadn't said it out loud yet. Like, what if this could be bigger? Not just one support group, but a whole network. Resources and meetings and maybe eventually a crisis center. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too big. "You're not," Elena said immediately. "Sarah, you have something special. You know how to connect with people, how to make them feel seen and heard. You should absolutely think bigger." Sarah went home that night with her mind spinning. She pulled out a notebook and started writing down ideas. What would it take to start a nonprofit? To get funding and space and support? To create something that could reach beyond one weekly meeting and help people across the city? Maybe even beyond. It felt overwhelming. Impossible. She was just a data analyst who'd stumbled into this by accident. She had no training, no credentials, no business trying to start something this big. But then she thought about Marcus, who'd read her blog and called a crisis hotline instead of ending his life. She thought about James, who said the support group had saved him. She thought about the dozens of comments on her blog from people who said her words had helped them through dark nights. She thought about Elena, alive and thriving, building a life she'd almost thrown away. And Sarah realized that maybe she didn't need credentials or training or permission. Maybe she just needed to care and to try and to believe that what she had to offer mattered. Maybe that was enough. Sarah's nonprofit took 8 months to establish, and there were so many times she almost gave up. The paperwork was overwhelming. Finding board members, writing bylaws, applying for grants, setting up a bank account. All of it was a maze of bureaucracy that made her head spin. But every time she thought about quitting, she'd get a message from someone whose life had been touched by her blog or the support group, and she'd find the strength to keep going. Elena was with her every step of the way. She'd enrolled in community college and was studying social work now, inspired by her own journey and determined to help others. She helped Sarah with grant applications, attended board meetings, and brainstormed ideas late into the night. They'd become more than friends. They were sisters, bound by that day on the platform and everything that had come after. They named the nonprofit the Platform Project. Sarah designed a logo, a simple image of a hand reaching out, and whenever she looked at it, she remembered that moment when she'd grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her back from the edge. The official launch was on a Saturday in spring, almost exactly 2 years after that day on the metro. They'd rented a community space, put up banners, and invited everyone who'd been part of their journey. The support group members were there, people who'd reached out through the blog, local therapists and social workers who wanted to partner with them. Sarah's sister came with her family, and Sarah's niece toddled around passing out cookies to everyone. Even Tom and Maria and some of Sarah's other co-workers showed up to support her. Sarah stood at the front of the room looking out at all these faces and felt so overwhelmed she could barely speak. 2 years ago, she finally managed. "I was in the darkest place I'd ever been. I'd given up on myself. I'd stopped believing my life had any meaning or purpose. And then one morning I saw someone who needed help, and something in me that I thought had died suddenly woke up." She looked at Elena, who was standing off to the side with tears streaming down her face. "I saved her life that day, and I didn't realize until much later that she saved mine too. She reminded me that my actions matter, that I matter, that there's a reason to keep going even when everything feels hopeless. And now together, we want to create spaces where other people can find that same reminder." The Platform Project started with small steps. They continued the weekly support groups, but added more meetings at different times to accommodate people's schedules. They created a resource library with information about free therapy, job training, housing assistance, and crisis support. They started a peer counseling program where people who'd been through their own struggles could be trained to support others. Sarah quit her job as a data analyst 6 months after the launch. It was terrifying, leaving behind the security and the steady paycheck, but she couldn't do both anymore. The platform project needed her full attention, and more importantly, she needed it. She'd found her purpose, her calling, and she couldn't walk away from it. The nonprofit grew faster than she'd ever imagined. They got grants from local foundations. Community members donated money and time. Therapists volunteered their services. Within a year, they'd helped over 300 people access mental health support, housing assistance, or job training. They'd facilitated countless support group meetings. They'd answered crisis calls in the middle of the night and talked people through their darkest moments. But more than the numbers, it was the individual stories that mattered. Like Rachel, who came to a support group meeting so depressed she could barely speak, and 6 months later was volunteering to help facilitate meetings for others. Like David, no relation to Sarah's ex-husband who'd been homeless and suicidal when he found them, and who now had an apartment and a job and was taking classes to become a counselor. Like Yolanda, whose teenage son had died by suicide, and who channeled her grief into volunteering with the Platform Project to help other families access resources before it was too late. Every single person had a story. Every single person mattered. And Sarah, who'd spent so long feeling invisible and worthless, was now at the center of something meaningful and real. One afternoon, she was in the Platform Project office, a small space they'd rented in a building downtown, when she got a call from an unknown number. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Dr. Jennifer Walsh. I'm a psychiatrist and researcher specializing in suicide prevention, and I came across your blog and learned about the Platform Project. I have to say, what you've built is remarkable. Would you be willing to speak at a conference I'm organizing? I think your story and your approach could help a lot of people." Sarah almost said no. She still thought of herself as someone who'd just stumbled into this, not an expert or anyone qualified to speak at a conference. But then she thought about how many people might hear her story, might be inspired to reach out to someone struggling, might find hope in knowing that healing is possible. "I'd be honored," she said. The conference was 3 months later, in a big hotel downtown. There were hundreds of mental health professionals, researchers, and advocates in the audience. Sarah stood backstage, her hands shaking, wondering what she'd been thinking agreeing to this. Elena was there with her, holding her hand. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just tell the truth. That's all you've ever done." Sarah walked onto the stage and looked out at all those faces. She thought about that morning 2 years ago, standing on the metro platform, feeling like her life was over even though she was still breathing. She thought about grabbing Elena's arm, that split-second decision that changed everything.